Perfect. Well, thank you for the introduction, Ben. And good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Heritage Volunteering Group Transforming Communities Conference 2025. My name is Georgia Hendry. I am the Primary and Outdoor Learning Officer at the Auckland Project.
Hello, good morning, everybody. My name is Gemma. I am the Learning Manager at the Auckland Project.
And today we are running a workshop centred on creating communities around volunteering. Like Ben mentioned, he is our wonderful technical host who will be monitoring the chat today, as well as solving any unexpected tech issues that we may encounter. So what will this morning's workshop look like? So our workshop outcomes for today are to learn from fellow volunteer managers and hear about their journey in the role, to consider what you and your volunteers want to get out of the volunteering experience, to identify potential pitfalls and challenges, and to create a bespoke toolkit centered on creating communities around volunteering. Myself and Gemma, we will be sharing the journey of how we have created a close-knit community of learning and skills volunteers at our organisation, as we have both stepped into the role as volunteer manager. Now, hopefully by sharing the stages of growth as well as the pitfalls and challenges that we've faced along the way, we want to encourage you guys to reflect on your current practice, considering how to get the most out of the volunteer experience. Now, throughout the workshop, you will have the opportunity to create an action plan tailored to creating communities around volunteering within your organisation. So something to take away at the end of the session. So to start off with, what is the Auckland Project? Some of you may have heard of it, some of you might not be familiar at all. The Auckland Project is a heritage regeneration charity based in the Northeast, which is working to establish the town of Bishop Auckland as a multi-visit cultural destination. Now, we stimulate social and economic regeneration using our heritage sites, which include Auckland Palace, the Spanish Gallery, the Mine Gallery, the Faith Museum, just to name a few. We've got a few more venues as well. And these sites bring the rich cultural identity of Bishop Auckland to life for our visitors. And in turn, the profits and opportunities created are used to revitalise the area. Now, the Auckland Project's overarching vision is to ensure that future generations inherit a prosperous town. Now, in terms of volunteering, in order to achieve this aim, the organisation has over 300 volunteers. And I think that really highlights the importance for effective devolved volunteer management by department. So myself and Gemma are volunteer managers for the Learning and Skills department of the Auckland Project.
So just to give you a little bit of an idea about what we do within our roles, as Georgia said, we are both part of the Learning and Skills team. And the Learning and Skills team contributes to the social regeneration of Bishop Auckland by working primarily with children and young people in formal education. So the vast majority of our work is linked into nurseries, schools, colleges, and universities. And through our work, we use our sites, our stories, and our collections to develop cultural capital, to stimulate a sense of pride of place within our local area, to increase academic attainment in the classroom, but also to widen children and young people's aspirations as well. And right the way through the development of our programme and our team, our volunteers are and have been a vital and integral part. So to give you an idea, we've kind of had a think about our programme and what it looks like, and we really see it as having three core pillars. One pillar is staff, the other is students, and finally volunteers. And we've put our students in the middle of those kind of pillars, as for us, our work is ultimately focused on them. That is the function of our department, but our staff and our volunteers are on either side as we work together in different ways to support our students, and between these three pillars, develop a sort of small heritage-based community. And so by working together, we build relationships, we share knowledge, we deepen experience and learn from each other. And all of that together helps us to achieve the outcomes that ultimately I've just mentioned our department sets out to achieve. And we wrote this in our application when we first applied to deliver a workshop at this conference, but I'll repeat it now because I think Georgia and I both feel it's incredibly important, because for us, our volunteers are family. And I know that for some organisations that might be a bit of a cliche, but it's not for us. It really, really is our guiding principle as a department within a sort of operating within a wider organisation. So what we're going to do is we'll tell you a little bit now about our volunteer journey. It's taken around about 6 years to get to the point that we're in now, and it hasn't always been smooth. But we'll talk to you a little bit about how our programs got started, how it's developed, some of the issues we faced along the way and how we've overcome them. And then we'll take breaks as we go so that we can split you up into breakout rooms, but also help you to develop a toolkit as well. So I first arrived at the Auckland Project as a learning officer back in 2019, and I'd had lots of experience in established volunteer programs. And I kind of had an idea of what I wanted our volunteering program to look like. I was very lucky in that I've been part of lots of close-knit volunteer and staff groups before, and I wanted to make sure that continued, and I wanted to co-develop a program alongside our volunteers. And I think quite naively at the time, I thought I would be able to come in and say, this is really what I would love to do. I'd love to get you involved. And everybody would go, yes, absolutely, that sounds great. And it would all be perfect. And that isn't really what happened. So when I arrived, there were around 7 or 8 volunteers in the learning and skills team, I think, and they weren't being regularly engaged. And this was because our main site, Auckland Palace, was at the time undergoing a major redevelopment. We had a huge chunk of NLHF funding, and so our education programme wasn't really as active as it is now. And so the first step that I really needed to take before we did anything else was actually getting our volunteers engaged in the first place. And I remember I hosted a tea and cake kind of get to know you kind of afternoon. And you'll see this is a theme as we go through. We have lots of tea and cake, I think, is probably one of the foundational elements of our programme. But just really before we did anything, just to actually see who our volunteers were, get to know who they were, what they wanted out of a programme. And at around that time, I kind of came out to them and said, you know, I really want to develop an education programme around this new site of Auckland Palace, in partnership with our volunteers, using really their site knowledge and their experience in teaching. I was very much aware by this point that our volunteers were all retired teachers or head teachers, so they had a huge wealth of experience, but obviously as a new person joining the team, they would also have much more site experience than I did. And so what I didn't want to do is come in and impose a programme. I wanted to make sure that they were getting as much out of that programme and using their skills and experience as much as possible. And what was really interesting was when I said that, I got an awful lot of resistance. It wasn't the approach that had been used, certainly within the kind of what was then the education team previously. And there was kind of I think there was a perception that I was asking our volunteers to do my job for me. And saying, please do all of these things because I'll just sit back and watch. And that wasn't really what I was going for. But it was very clear that there wasn't the level of trust there. And so I realised that we needed to build that trust, and it needed to be gradual, and that hopefully we would engage our volunteers and find out a bit more about them and what they wanted over time. And so I started developing a program together, and initially just started asking for a little bit of feedback, just to start opening up a more kind of conversational approach and saying, oh, I've created this. What do you think? How could you feed into this? And it did start to go really well. We had a lot of sessions that started to be booked on. as the palace opened in November 2019. And by March 2020, we were looking busy. Our volunteers had loads of really good, fantastic ideas. And then we all know what happened in March 2020, which really put a bit of a spanner in the works, not least because our site was closed, all of our educational work stopped, and the majority of our then staffing team, particularly within the learning department, was made redundant or put on furlough. So everything really just kind of stopped in its tracks. I was, towards the end of 2020, moved across to an entirely different team, the curatorial team, with lots of different work. And so as a result of that, we went from kind of just starting to build a system together to having absolutely nothing again. And so the end of 2020 was really just about reconnecting and starting to rebuild that trust. And I hosted another tea and cake. Again, as I say, this will come back a lot, but virtual on Zoom this time. And I had a really honest discussion with our volunteers about everything that had happened, because obviously our volunteer and head of volunteering had kept everyone in the loop as much as possible, but they still didn't know what was happening at that departmental level. And so we had a really honest conversation about what we wanted to do, and decided that for 2021, it was really going to be about surviving and adapting. And thankfully, all of our volunteers agreed to pivot over to the curatorial team. So the nature of our work had changed. It wasn't working with children and young people, but we were doing some consultation around another new site, the Faith Museum, with communities, where in discussion with our volunteer team, we realised that we could kind of utilise a lot of those existing skills, all of those people skills we could still really use. And in the short term, our volunteers still really wanted to be there and really wanted to support. I think particularly me, because of that trust that we'd started to build. And so I was incredibly lucky that they stayed on and we were able to make things work as we went. And that was really much of 2021 for us. By 2022, I think it was time to rebuild. So the learning department, we got news that it was going to be reinstated with an entirely new staff team, an entirely new programme. And I think this time learned quite a lot of lessons from the first time, because I really wanted to start off on the right foot. So we hosted an in-person tea and cake, again, kept that social element as one of those key building blocks, but also instituted as part of that a full departmental update, who our new staff were, how we were going to grow, what the plan was, and opportunities for our volunteer team to feed in. We also said at that time that we were going to start to offer timely updates, which do still happen today. We keep going just to keep everybody in the loop. And it was also around that time that we were just starting to consider, through our head of volunteering, a volunteer management system, Better Impact. So it was starting to think, explaining to our volunteers that something was going to arrive soon, but starting to think how that would work and how the work of our team could work within the wider organisational framework as well. And I think at that point, that was just roughly when Georgia joined us in the team, and she took on a really, really significant role within volunteer management. So I'll hand over to you to talk about the next bit.
Thanks, Jem. So Gemma's just took you through kind of the early stages of volunteer management in our department, and we're going to move on to looking at kind of growth and refinement as we started to find our feet. Now, I started at the Auckland Project in 2022, and I started in visitor operations, and I then came over to learning and skills in 2023. And I was at quite a different stage in my career for when Gem began being a volunteer manager. I was on the kind of bottom rung of the ladder in terms of my career. So I was just starting out. And it meant that we had a bit of a different approach to being volunteer manager in our department. So I took on the role alongside Gemma. after our kind of previously designated volunteer manager had left, Graham. He left our team, so the role passed over. Now, to begin kind of growing and refining our departmental volunteer base and our strategy, I suppose the first thing was I had to think about my own training. Like most of you on this call, as heritage professionals, you'll know that we most likely had to do lots of volunteering before we stepped into our roles. So I had been a volunteer at other heritage sites, but never managing those volunteer communities. So it was definitely a step up from what I had been doing before. So updating my skills and knowledge as a volunteer manager was essential. If I didn't know or understand the software that we used or our processes or our aims as both an organisation and a department, then how could I effectively do this role? And what was really lovely is Gemma did have a whole host of experience and knowledge of the Better Impact system. So sitting down with Gemma and our head of volunteering, Michelle Armstrong, as well, it really helped to put those kind of jigsaw pieces into place. And I suppose that leads on really nicely to my second point about making volunteer management software work for you. Now, like Gemma mentioned, at the Auckland Project, we use the volunteer management system Better Impact. And if any of you use Better Impact, you will know that it can be tricky to use. It isn't always the easiest of systems. It has a huge breadth of functions and configurations. And so tailoring the departmental volunteer space to better suit us was key. What it would look like for our volunteers in terms of opportunities they could sign up to, what roles they could have, how that would look like, because we split our department in terms of primary workshops, secondary workshops, whether you would be needed to lead a session or support a session. So designing and redesigning our software to better suit us and the needs of our volunteers was really key. Now, Gemma has mentioned already, but we realised quite early on that our volunteer base was mostly retired primary teachers or head teachers. And so we realised that we had to diversify the volunteer demographic that we had. Now, a way in which that we could do this was adjust our recruitment strategies to actively recruit from places nearby. For us, that was Durham University. And that would mean that we could start to build a community that was more inclusive. It had more age ranges. It had, as well, a larger skill set being built. You had people with maybe a more modern perspective and those with lots of years of experiences as well. So we were actively recruiting from Durham University, and that meant that we had people maybe who were postgrad or maybe wanting to think about a career in museums or heritage, starting to volunteer with us. So it was quite refreshing to have those people join us and get some new perspective as well. And I suppose the last point on kind of growth and refinement was ensuring meaningful volunteer interactions, making sure that along every single step of the way, every interaction that we had with volunteers meant something. Like Gemma said, tea and cake is a huge theme of this presentation. So it was making sure that volunteers had chance and opportunities to socialise within our departmental volunteers, so with each other, with the wider TAP team. It also meant that our interactions from the very start of inducting a volunteer, asking questions such as, what can we do for you, as much as what can you do for us, was really, really important to see how we could support people in kind of different stages of their lives and careers, what they wanted to do, why this could be beneficial, mutually beneficial, for both sides. So very much having meaningful interactions from the very, very start, support along the way as volunteers shadowed our shifts before they were allowed to sign up properly, to then our kind of termly updates, our tea and cake, making sure those social interactions were ongoing and lasting. Because kind of retention of our volunteers is something that we wanted to make sure was going to happen, that we had them for the long haul, that they weren't just going to dip in and out. So moving on to our first activity. As mentioned at the very start in our outcomes, we're going to be working together during this session to create a toolkit for creating volunteer communities that's going to be bespoke to you. Now, for us in Learning Skills at the Auckland Project, our volunteer team grew organically, but it's good to have a solid plan in place for what growth will look like. We didn't have one of those, and looking back, it would have been incredibly useful to have planned out what we wanted it to look like. So our first activity, I just want you to reflect on your current practice and looking forwards in the next 12 to 18 months, where do you want your volunteer programme to go? Now, we have crafted a worksheet as typical learning officers, and it will be available after the conference in the digital tote bag that you will receive. And it's going to look something like this. Now, just for 2 minutes, we aren't going to break out quite yet, but if you could just jot down or have a think about that first section, A there, how do you want your volunteer programme to grow over the next 12 to 18 months? So we'll just give a few minutes there for you guys to have a think, jot some ideas down.
I think while you're doing that as well, it might be an idea to think about one particular aspect. For us, we had lots of ideas around where we wanted our program to go, but we never really kind of thought it through properly. But whether it is something like wanting to get your volunteers more engaged, wanting to diversify your recruitment pool, whether it is wanting to build that sort of social aspect more, that creating communities idea, it is really useful to have, as with any work stream that we all have, a really clear goal in mind. And I think having something to focus on for us probably would have been helpful in lots of ways, because I think it prevents that sense of overwhelm as well. And when you're prioritising, I think is really important.
And please feel free to pop these in the chat. We won't always have time today to reflect on some of the things, but if it's in the chat, then when this recording goes out, it'll be available for you all to see.
I should just say, you can't, as far as I'm aware, you can't fill in the worksheet on our screen. But if you have any space to just jot those down, then as George said, the worksheets themselves will be in the digital toolkit. But there are only kind of 3 elements. And the first question that we're asking from you is, where do you want your volunteer program to go? And then shall we hand over to Ben, our lovely technical host, and shall we get us into our breakout rooms? A minute or 2 to finish off. But what we would really like you to do is we would like you to discuss what you've just written down. How do you want your program to go? And if you're struggling to kind of think, actually, I'm not really sure where we're at, because I think it can be quite easy to think, oh, well, I know I want it to grow, but not in what way. Please have a chat as a group. We all have so much experience. I know everyone in this digital room will have lots of experience. So I think this is a great opportunity for us all to learn from each other. What has worked well for you? What hasn't worked so well? What has been a really good idea in terms of focusing on in growth, just to really refine that idea so you've got a really, really clear picture in mind. Options. As we're just welcoming everybody back in, if I could please make sure that we're all on mute, But then also, if anyone could please pop your statements in the chat in terms of where you would like your volunteering programme to go. Georgia and I would love to see it, and we will incorporate as we go. So yes, please do feel free to pop those in a chat. Now, while we're doing that, after we've had all of these great ideas, the next thing to really talk about, as always, is what can go wrong. So as we all know, the best laid plans rarely run smooth. And I think if I was to do everything that we've done again, the one thing that I would do is actually start to think, what are the pitfalls, what are the challenges that we could face as part of this process? And I think for us, we had a very ambitious plan in terms of volunteer growth, but perhaps what we didn't think necessarily about is what the flip side of that could be. And there were three kind of main challenges, I would say, that in this big period of refinement and growth, we started to face. The first one was that we had a relatively limited departmental induction process. And previously, our volunteers, where the team had grown, we'd grown kind of one here or one person there. And our volunteers, as we've said previously, tended to have a lot of experience, both in education, but also were older adults and were quite confident in themselves as well. And so when we started getting an influx of newer volunteers who perhaps that didn't have that experience, it was a little bit more of a challenge to kind of get them on board and for them to really understand kind of what a volunteer role might look like and what that might look like within our organisation. As well as that, at the same time as we were growing our volunteer team, our wider department was growing, the work of our department was diversifying. We went from having maybe 4 or 5 workshops for children in Key Stage 2 to today where we have well over 100 workshops across 17 different subject areas. So as you can imagine, that meant that our volunteer role alongside that was growing increasingly complex and diverse. We weren't just having volunteers supporting and delivering sessions. We were having volunteers delivering activities independently. We were having volunteers support us in preparing resources and materials, helping with admin, being involved in session planning, all sorts of different things. And so it was harder to get everyone trained and confident to the right level with all aspects of that role, even our established volunteers, let alone newer, younger, less overall experienced volunteers who we were bringing into the team. And as well as that, there was also more diversity simply in terms of the activities that we were sharing on Better Impact. So there was more options for people to pick from, which meant that people were getting confused. And it was also hard for us as well in terms of differentiating between those activities and making it really clear what it was that we were asking our volunteers to do on a given day, basically. And the last kind of challenge that we really faced was kind of really very much of our own making, because it was something that we wanted from the programme, which was that our volunteer pool was then more diverse, which was fantastic. And it was very much a goal of this growth period. But it meant that our volunteers, as well as bringing a whole host of different things to the table, wanted a whole host of different things from their volunteer experience. And so we knew quite quickly that we were going to have to put some steps in place to overcome these challenges, or it was all going to fall apart quite quickly. It was a real tipping point for us. So the first thing we realised pretty quickly ourselves, which was that we needed to go from having a limited departmental induction process to having a strong formal induction process. So Georgia went and did a fantastic piece of work with support from Michelle, our head of volunteering, and she created I always forget the name of it. I want to call it tips and tricks, but it's not tips and tricks. Volunteer essentials document. And it had everything from what you would be doing, the role profile, to where you would be going on a given day, what the uniform requirements were. Georgia even created literally a step-by-step, photo-by-photo guide how to get to our classroom from the front door of our palace, which is such a useful document because it really is a maze and it's such a simple thing, but having all of that in one document was so incredibly useful. On top of that, we already had training, organisational, but also we put in departmental training, we put in shadow shifts so that our volunteers could get more of an idea of what they would be doing before they started to sign up for sessions. And we also put in an induction meeting with me, whereby we could actually face to face go through the volunteers essentials document, tick every section off, make sure that if there were questions or comments or queries or concerns that we dealt with it in the moment. And we also then had a document to take away with us to say, we know what our volunteers have done, we know what they understand, and they've agreed to that as well. And I think that communication was really important for us. And I think that did work very quickly, worked quite well actually in terms of the onboarding process. The rest, I think, was a little bit trickier, and we did ask for help here. Michelle, our head of volunteering, gave us some really, really useful support in terms of how we would look at managing these more complex functions and our more diverse volunteer team. And one of the big suggestions that she gave for us was actually piloting within our organisation a more devolved system for volunteer management on better impact. I'm sure you know yourself, if you use a volunteer management system in a big organisation, it can be quite difficult to really kind of narrow down different roles and different opportunities. An education role is very, very, very different from a visitor experience role, where you can have somebody come once every week on a Wednesday and do the same activity in visitor experience. You can't do that in education. Some weeks we will have 200 children from year 9 coming to learn about business studies, and other weeks we'll have 10 from year 2 coming to learn about the story of the Prince Bishops, which is what our palace is based on. So we needed something a little bit more focused on us with more flexibility. And what it did is it gave us the freedom to create new role profiles. So we had, alongside volunteer support roles, we had volunteer lead roles for our more confident volunteers and admin roles as well. And with that admin role in particular, it also enabled us to offer a new shift pattern. Previously, it had been very much ad hoc, and it still is with our education workshops, because it can be so different every week, responsive as to where our schools are. But with our admin shifts, we could offer them once a week. And so we would, for those that wanted that more piece of volunteering, particularly sort of parents, but students as well, that was really, really important to us. And these things really did start to work together quite quickly and helped us to overcome these challenges, because we were more organised, we knew what we wanted, as well as enabling us to be really responsive for what our volunteers wanted. So that's going to bring us to our second breakout room, which is what we would really, really like to do is to get you, we're only going to give you, it says 5 minutes, but I think we're only going to give you 2 or 3. Feel free to chat in the group as you go, but start to think, because I think this is what we should have done more. What do your volunteers want or need from your programme as it goes? It's so important that we know what we want, but it's not just about us. It's a two-way street. It's a two-way conversation. What do your volunteers need? And in meeting those 2 needs, those needs aren't always the same. They don't always match. So what pitfalls and challenges can you foresee? One of the big ones for us is that we saw lots and lots of volunteers wanting to come in and wanting to have really structured, supportive volunteering, whereas we were growing our team so quickly, we needed extra pairs of hands, and so that was a real kind of pitfall that we foresaw. So just start to think about that. We'll pop you straight back in your breakout groups, because it is useful just to kind of chat these things through. And start to think, and maybe some others have faced some of these kind of challenges already and kind of saw where they went with that. So then we'll hand back over to you for literally just a couple of minutes.
So what does our volunteer programme look like today? Just a quick recap that the Learning and Skills Department contributes to the social regeneration of Bishop Auckland by working with children and young people in formal education. And like Gemma mentioned previously, we use our site stories and collections to develop cultural capital, stimulate pride of place, increase attainment, and to widen aspiration. Now, our volunteers are a vital and integral part of this team, which hopefully you have got from us when we've been delivering this workshop, how important they really are to our work.
There we go. Sorry, everyone. We're working across 3 computers with all of our notes.
So our volunteer programme isn't separate, but it is integral to the work that we do. Now, a devolved volunteer management system means we have total control over the roles and activities that we can offer, and have been able to diversify these sufficiently for our needs. But we still have the support and the structure of the main organisation as well. Now, the volunteer management system also gives us a formal framework to use, but still has adaptability built in. It is still flexible. And that means that we can meet our volunteers where they are at and help them get what they want to out of the experience in a way that still benefits us. So meeting the volunteers on their terms, on their ground. And finally, we still kept the tea and cake. Communication, socialization, and ultimately fun are a core parts of our work. We want our volunteers to be enjoying themselves while they're here, and we want them to have a nice time. And we have these 3 times yearly socials, Christmas parties, afternoon tea, even visits to a railway. And as a team, our job is to widen experiences and opportunities for all of those who we engage with, including children, which our programme is focused on, but also our volunteers as well. And one key element of this is giving people a chance to interact with others that live in Bishop Auckland who they wouldn't normally get to meet in day-to-day life. So by getting volunteers involved with the various different aspects of our programme, we not only get their support, but we increase opportunities for interactions between volunteers, children, and teachers to happen. Our kind of social networks, our connections get stronger and stronger through this. And our children get to know our volunteers over time. We have multiple partner schools across our primary and secondary programme, and this works towards our organisation's wider aim of building a community in Bishop Auckland. And as our volunteer relationships have grown, some have come to us with suggestions for ways we could develop sessions. And this year, a volunteer has even successfully applied for external funding to develop her own session, which we're going to trial in the new year alongside her. And over the years, we have been lucky enough to develop extremely close relationships with our volunteers, but it did take time, patience, flexibility, and ultimately accountability to know when we needed to change. And we mentioned this already, but today our volunteers really are family. And Gemma mentioned that it is a cliche that lots of organisations use, but it really is something that we use as our guiding principle. It's something that we cherish a lot, our volunteer family that we have.
So we were going to put you into a great breakout room, but we aren't because we want to make sure that we finish on time. So the last part of today, really creating that toolkit for where you want to see things going with your volunteer program in the future, was to think, how can we overcome those potential pitfalls and challenges that we highlighted while still making sure we achieve what we need to with our twin peaks kind of our what we want as a staff member out of our program and what a volunteer might want out of our program. and just start to workshop that and discuss that as a group. But rather than put you into a breakout room, what we thought we would do is get you to pop that in the chat. So are there any specific challenges that you can foresee? And you'll see here, we do love worksheets. So I made a lovely, this is my road to success. And you can see I've got bridges and all sorts going on. I apologise. We normally work with young people. It just comes out of us. But if you could pop in the chat, what are the challenges that you're foreseeing, and how, if you can see a way of overcoming them, what is that way? Or do you need any advice from any other members of the team and any other members of the chat as we go forwards? Just having a look at the chat so far, it has been really, really interesting. If there's so many people have so many different models of volunteering, for some who are much, much more kind of small scale and really, really based around kind of personal communities, while others, I think we saw one that had like 20 sites, which is just incredible. And it's very different challenges. But I think in lots of ways, I think we're in the middle of the two, in that we're a very small team within a very big organisation with a lot of sites. And I think one of the things for us was definitely that making time and space for communication and catching up. And the devolved volunteer management system worked really, really well for that, because it means that our volunteers can still feel part of the organisation. They still get invited to big kind of volunteer events, whether that is the volunteer awards that we had, which were lovely, whether that is just updates that happen, I think twice or three times a year for the main organisation. So there's wider opportunities that they can participate in, but that we still have that control whereby we can then bring our separate team together for an event, for a social, communicate to them directly. It was a really nice way of, we get the best of both worlds within that. And I think that is really, really important as we go.
I think maybe while we have a few minutes left, if anyone does have like a verbal question to ask while we're here, feel free to answer now. What we will do is answer any questions in the chat as well, and that will go out after the call has ended.
Yeah.
So if anyone does have a burning question to ask while we have maybe a minute or two, please feel free to ask.
I really like the developing the buddy volunteer support group. I think that's really, really important. And I think that encourages the volunteers as well to engage with each other and support each other. And we've certainly seen that, actually. We haven't used a formal buddy support system, although it has been used elsewhere at the Auckland Project. But what we have paired up our volunteers kind of on an informal basis, and it's been lovely actually to see some of those relationships blossom. We've had a new volunteer recently who has got a lot out of having just almost a friend to be there, and I think it complements that combats that idea of kind of increased loneliness for a lot of people, because it's a peer that somebody is developing that relationship with alongside us and alongside the children. And I think, yeah, treating volunteers like partners is just that is for us what that means. They're not just a resource. We're not just saying, how can we get the use of these people? It's actually saying they want, our volunteers are so incredibly passionate, so experienced, and they want to make a difference to the young people in our area. And being able to see them do that, I think is wonderful, and being able to work with them to do that is just incredible.
So I think we will possibly end the workshop here, just so you have enough time to move on to the next presentation that you'll be in, to grab a cuppa and a biscuit, pop to the loo, and just a big thank you again for everyone that has joined on this call, and I hope it has been useful. What me and Gemma will do as well, we can pop our contact details into the chat. So if you do have any other questions in a few days' time after this has ended, please drop us an email and we will answer any questions.